Welcome to a show about learning technologies so powerful they transcend the boundaries of reality itself. I'm your host, Pinky Gonzalez, and this is New School VR. Welcome back to New School VR, everybody. This is Pinky Gonzalez, and today I get to be on location at Industrial Training International, and I'm so excited to introduce both Zach Parnell, the president of the company, and Caleb Steinborn. He is the VR product manager. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Hi.
So tell us where in the world we are right now.
We're in Woodland, Washington, really the greater Portland, Oregon area. I think we're 30 minutes from Portland and about 2.5 hours south of Seattle.
Excellent. Why here?
Family business. My parents started the business actually just north of Portland in Vancouver in 1986. And I guess they landed up here in Woodland about in 1996 for the training center, and it all started from there.
Tell us about the training center. What do you guys teach people to do?
Yeah, we specialize in crane and rigging and load handling training. So we're talking about VR today, so obviously we have covered quite a bit of the learning taxonomy through different modes of training. Our training centers deliver a lot of hands-on courses, and we have 7 of them throughout North America, including Canada and Alaska down to even to Houston and Memphis and so on. But this is sort of our flagship headquarters and training center we had. It's nice. There's a lot of customers in the area too, from the Boeings of the world and shipyards and paper mills and whatnot in the Northwest. But cranes and rigging, it's interesting. It's an activity that is done or conducted by a lot of different crafts, whether it's engineers to pipe fitters and boilermakers, carpenters. So it touches almost every major industry and a myriad of craft skilled people.
All right, so this is an exciting show for me, as we were talking about off the record before we hit record. Mm-hmm. New School VR is a relatively new podcast as of this recording. This will be our 10th formal episode, and it's all about the use of VR and AR to assist the learning experience. Where you guys fit in a very important way is training people to do real things. And real things that might be very expensive and or very dangerous and or very time-consuming to learn how to do in the real world. So technology giving us the ability to do this on a different level and a different capacity is a very big deal. I think it's one of the highest arts, or the highest forms of the arts, and really what the show is all about. So I've got a bunch of questions lined up that will speak to that. Just so people really have an idea of how comprehensive your training services are. I mean, VR is just a very new part of what you guys do. What do people what's a day in the life for you? What does your typical customer look like?
Sure. Typical customer is a loaded term because, I mean, we do work for, like I said, shipyards, DOE facilities, nuclear power plants, refineries, pipeline companies, pulp and paper manufacturing. So I think a lot of these customers do have a few things in common. Specifically, they're all experiencing in general in the U.S. a skilled labor gap. They're having a lot of baby boomers retiring, and not enough young people filling the shoes of those folks, but also and then a lot of big gaps in what skills those young people are coming in with. So again, cranes and rigging, lifting something in a nuclear power plant, it sounds much different, but it's not, because gravity is the same whether as opposed to lifting something in a paper mill, right? So gravity works the same, cranes work similarly the same. Sometimes you're lifting over radioactive material, and sometimes you're lifting over a paper machine or something, so
details.
Yeah. There's different processes and, protocols for each environment. But for instance, we had about 6 people from the U.S. Navy in this morning trying out the simulator, and they utilize portal cranes on a port side, pedestal cranes, and they have mobile cranes at the shipyard there, as well as overhead cranes in their fabrication facility. So that's a good summary, I guess, of the simulator project we're working on, and why, because there's it does apply across every industry, which is helpful. It'd be really hard for us to be in a business where we're trying to build a product just for paper companies. You know?
Yeah, although there are many a niche company out there that are really industry specific, but you're blessed to have the broad spectrum that you do.
Quite a blessing. Yeah. Good.
So it's typically a company that comes to you to make sure their employees are well trained. Is it ever the would-be employee who needs certification and
very rarely
training?
Yeah, I would say in some niches, like in our Houston training center, there's a lot of individuals that come through, but for the most part we are a B2B company training. We have account managers internally that help specific key accounts develop their people. You know, it's a general business.
Gotcha. All right, Caleb, tell us a little bit about yourself, man. What do you do here?
I went to the local university, Washington State University, up here at the Vancouver campus. And short story on myself, it was in my final semester we were doing our capstone project. Several of us business students were from different fields within business, and we got together to assist a local business as a part of our class. To make sure that you don't screw up your recommendations to the local business, part of the program is you're given a business mentor. This mentor has nothing to do with the immediate project, and he's there to guide you and see what you're doing. So Zach happened to be my business mentor, and he was observing my project management skills as I was working with my team. And about halfway through the project, he came to me and asked if I'd be interested in an internship, which I said yes to.
Smart man.
And it was it was fun. First, I was as an intern for like 6-7 weeks before.
Well, I think your first day on the job was a flight to Chicago. We were rolling out an e-learning partnership with TPC Training Systems, a big partner of ours, and they're excellent in the maintenance skills training realm. So Caleb helped us integrate with their LMS, and then I'd been working with Cirrus Labs on this VR project for probably 6 months prior to all that. And we were just getting to the finish line on, yes, we're going to move forward. So I think within a month or two of Caleb being onboarded last spring of 2016, we pulled the trigger with Cirrus Labs to partner on this development, which, I mean, that sort of started, I'd say, in August, actually, if I recall. But
1st of August.
We knew that we were moving forward by June-ish. And at that point, it was a godsend to have Caleb on board to help us with that project, because I don't know what we would have had to find a person that had MIS type skills and be okay talking with developers all day, as well as technical SMEs on our end. And so Caleb was already on board for another reason, and then the VR project started. So Nice. It was just beautiful how it all worked out. And he's almost got us to the finish line. We're launching the project at Con Expo here in March in Las Vegas.
Awesome. So a preemptive congratulations.
Oh, thanks. We'll hope it all goes well, but yeah.
Well, you're already in the press. I don't know if this show qualifies as press, maybe media, but you have been written up a couple of times in Road to VR, which is one of my favorite blogs on the VR space. It covers a very wide swath. How did they find you? What was the connection there, and how did you start talking about this stuff more publicly?
So as soon as I was onboarded for becoming the VR product manager, I was like, okay, I need to be learning more about VR. So subscribed to several different news sources, found Road to VR, and read their articles daily throughout the entire project. Once we reached a point where it was time to start reaching out for more marketing, contacted Road to VR, was in discussion with their editor, and we arranged to have one of their journalists show up at our Houston location, at which I was able to give him a hands-on demonstration, then take him out and put him on a real crane. So that was the second of the 2 articles that we did with them.
Nice.
They had this wild idea that, wow, could we try out the simulator with a person that's never been in a crane before, and in an hour, and then go run a real crane? Do you have real cranes? Well, yeah, we do. So I think the article was titled something like 60 minutes.
Yeah, training to craning in 60 minutes.
There
Yeah.
you go. Yes,
Yeah.
nice.
So I don't know how well he did, but I'm sure he didn't wreck the crane. We know that. So, but yeah, it was neat to see. And we were actually in town there to talk about. This is definitely a hot topic, right? I mean, Bechtel is the world's largest construction company, and they hosted us for 2 days at they have an innovation center at their Houston headquarters, and this facility is just incredible. It's got one of those 60-foot long smart board screens on there. You can literally by a touch of a finger shrink the screen and annotate and everything. And they wanted us to bring in we had our mobile crane simulator there. We had the aerial work platform simulator, which is a Cirrus Labs product that we distribute. We also had their Cirrus Labs One Room product, which is it uses the HTC Vive system, and it's you're basically in a 14 by 14 foot room, and 1 second you're on top of the Hoover Dam doing a lockout tagout process, and the next scenario you're at the bottom of the ocean floor trying to troubleshoot a BOP blowout preventer as a technician. So it's very, very robust. And while we were in Houston, people were in the same room with you from Edmonton in the same environment troubleshooting with you, and it was like a VR go-to-meeting,
Wow.
So anyways, it was really cool. It was awesome week to have Road to VR there, and then at Bechtel we must have had 40 folks from the Bechtel group just coming through, and then we had a lot of outsiders come through the office as well and check it out.
Cool. Okay, so for listeners, one of the drawbacks of an audio-only podcast or audio primary podcast is that you can't see what this is, and it makes a big difference. So I'm very fortunate to have had a chance to sit down and actually play with this thing for quite a while before this interview, which is very exciting. For listeners at home that want to imagine what's going on, you're basically just in front of a desk, which, of course, as soon as you've got the headset on, you're in the crane. Just disappear from the room, and suddenly you're dealing with heavy machinery. You have, at this present build, you have 4 hand controllers, and soon we'll have foot controllers as well, right? Yep. This is based on the Oculus Rift platform. So earlier you mentioned the HTC Vive for a separate simulator. Yep. But this particular one is exclusive to the Rift for now.
Yep.
And
only temporarily. It's designed to work with OpenVR. So
great.
What we have here is much less of a product as much as a service that we're providing, and as such, we've really made sure that there's no ceiling on this. If HTC comes up with the next latest and greatest headset that is clearly superior to the Oculus, it is fully compatible today as is. So with however the technology progresses, we will be able to keep full track on the cutting edge.
Fantastic. Not only very smart, but I think that's good for the whole industry to be thinking broadly. Sure. And
well, we don't want to be in the hardware distribution business, right? I mean, we really are in the solutions business. We're able to tell the Navy today, listen, we're not here to sell you a laptop and an Oculus Rift headset. We want to create really good simulations for you, and it's very much disruptive to the typical construction simulation business, because that business model is structured on upfront intensive hardware cost structure. So, and it's sort of like hand over $250,000 and we'll get you a really hefty simulator with 10 screens and a big old chair and a server to go with it with 6 blades in it. It's very that's what the technology was available, and there's really powerful simulators that do that, but the advent with Oculus specifically, I would say, as a front runner, disrupting and making VR commercially viable, it's really disrupting a lot of legacy industries or legacy products, much like Disruptive Technology does. So that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing we were talking about before the show started here was my feeling that this is $1 trillion of R&D that has gone into the current state of VR. And these simulators, flight simulators, have been around for decades now, and some of them are many millions of dollars just in physical construction and operability and robotics. And, it's just incredible what they are able to teach people to do in an otherwise either an impossible or extremely dangerous or expensive scenario, right?
What was you mentioned when NASA put folks on the moon, they were using a computer as powerful as our phones today.
Yeah, if that.
So it's very similar. I mean, my kids are growing up with Oculus headsets on, and it's just that's what's disrupting the simulator of the 1990s per se.
So for we have an audience that is really into technology and education, but it's a very wide range. It could be classroom or parents or corporate or simulation, many different use cases. For those of us who are not as familiar with the industrial training industry, how many companies are out there creating these big, expensive things that are being disrupted?
There's not a ton of them. I'd say that I know of in North America, maybe about 5 to 10. I mean, there's some really high quality products, but now that Facebook is in the game, it's hard to compete, right? Mm-hmm. That's the challenge, because a lot of these systems are proprietary. They're built on a proprietary OS with proprietary code, and here, like Caleb's explaining, we're trying to use off-the-shelf computers, headsets, even the Unity platform, which I don't fully understand, but it's a...
And because we are using Unity, as you're aware, isn't restricted to Windows only. It's cross-platform as well, meaning that we're not tied to any particular OS, not tied to any particular VR hardware. This has much room for expansion.
Yeah.
Stellar. So then what really matters is user experience. It's a very well-designed graphical user interface. It's very intuitive. And to me, it's clear you guys have a background in what would traditionally be called e-learning. You have these modules. There's the clear process you're going to go through. Types of scenarios you're going to walk through, and then ultimately you're going to take quizzes and be graded. I'm really curious to hear about the quizzing process itself. How does a test or a quiz in VR differ from how it might on a laptop or an in-person training scenario?
We're just dabbling, I would say, in XAPI. Mm-hmm. And XAPI, I'm going to butcher this, and Caleb can help me, but let me take a shot at this. We have two very good LMS companies, learning management system companies, including TPC Training Systems, and actually United Rentals, of all companies, is a $6 billion equipment rental company. They've invested heavily in training through what they're calling United Academy. And both companies are looking to invest heavily in XAPI, which basically it's experience API. So it's gathering data from a user in a simulator, for instance, and scoring that and putting that in an LMS so it can be reported on. So in a crane, for instance, if you smash the load on the ground, that's bad. So, so if the user brings the load on the ground very pleasantly, they're going to have a higher score. And that happens in our industry, just not to get too deep in the details, but the National Commission for the Certification of Crane Operators, NCCCO, is the market leader in crane operator testing. And currently they have a practical examiner take an operator through a very rigorous practical exam, which does have a lot of areas for deduction. So a human being does need to physically watch someone operate a crane and mark deductions. A simulator can do a similar thing, and we are in talks with NCCCO about augmenting, not replacing their exam, but augmenting their exam potentially in the simulator, because the problem with typical testing in person is you have to have a crane available, and not everybody has a crane that they need. Like a lattice boom crawler crane is actually really hard to have available because they can be rented out for $5,000 a day. So it's a economic issue more than anything. So anyways, we are working through, as of now, the simulator is a training first tool. Admins can certainly do a lot of reporting with XAPI and understand how well their trainees are performing. But whether it's the U.S. Navy with the Navy Crane Center or a construction operator with NCCCO, they eventually just have to take a real exam on a real machine to kind of get their licensure, But go ahead. How did I do on XAPI?
No, you did very well. Like you said, so it's experience, application, program interface, and it's far superior than the previous types of grading systems, which would be either pass, fail, here's a percentage score, and that's the end of it. Like you were saying about putting the load on the ground. Currently in the simulator, it does grade you very critically on how you handle the load. If you're putting the load on the ground anything other than gently, you get docked points for it, and you put it down hard, very hard, excessively, critically,
Explosively.
Yeah.
and there's corresponding voiceovers to communicate to you how you're doing and to give you feedback. And you also will get a bonus for if you plant the load on the ground gently and properly. So that's just for the example of putting the load on the ground. The amount of things that we'll be able to put metrics on, from how you're controlling the load with the joysticks, how you handle the joysticks. Once we're able to integrate eye tracking, that's something we'll absolutely be implementing into it. If you have a hazard show up, say a person is walking their dog through your work site, did you actually visually look at the person? If so, how close did you get to looking at them? Were you even aware? Now it takes out any, oh, well, I saw them, or no, you didn't.
Yeah, so it's XAPI. The engine on both ends is trying to capture a myriad of those deduction type line items that an examiner would. So it's everything from eye tracking to excessive dynamic loading of the crane and everything. It's similar. It's funny, but games. The consumer market really drives tech innovation first. I grew up on a Nintendo 64, and Mario. I captured enough coins. It monitored how many coins I captured. I think I could get reduced in size once, right? And then you get killed. So those were the metrics it kind of captured on the user. Then Halo and others come along where, okay, you get shot 30 times in the leg, you're dead. If you get shot once in the chest, you're dead. So sorry to be too graphic, but it's the simulator or the game needs to learn or knows what's important or not, and that's what the development team is really about, trying to make, especially in industrial applications. You have to; those are very important learning objectives.
And then as we record these, they are then compiled into your user profile. So these can be written out then as reports given to your manager, and your manager can see very clearly how you performed. But once we roll out this certain feature as well, you'll be able to see how well you think you performed compared to your actual performance. So your manager will be able to then clearly see where you're strong, where you're not, where you need improvement, where you're weak, and it will really give a very well-rounded experience.
An interesting, to cover off on this topic, a really interesting idea that several customers have had, is implementing human performance improvement, which is HPI, or culture training, in a sense, into the simulator. For instance, a great idea we had, right now you can tip the crane over. And someone recommended,
Which is scary, by the way.
Yes, you did it. All right. Yeah. And it's even more scary with the actuator base when you're sitting on the, but the idea was that, okay, if it knows that it's Pinky and you tip the crane over, a tombstone pops up with Pinky's name on it. and and then pictures of your wife and kids show up at your tombstone. I mean, that is really teaching how scary and how important and risky what they're doing is actually really important for retention and to make sure they're performing correctly on the job. It's not, incidents typically aren't, in general, incidents aren't happening because people don't have the skills. Incidents happen because they have a lapse in judgment or a lapse in regard or care. So it is interesting that we're really focusing heavily on the mechanical operations of equipment right now, but implementing those cultural or HPI type trainings and learning objectives is really vital too.
So I can't wait to follow your progress, for you to be at this stage in version 1.0, so to speak, or just before the official launch, is to me it's the embodiment of what we've talked about in the e-learning and ed tech space for years. Kind of a tangent, but the XAPI protocol came out of Nashville, a group called Rusticy Software, and they're also known for the SCORM format, which was needed by the U.S. military in order to be able to standardize how people were using technology to be trained, and you needed to know if somebody had passed or failed across more than one system. And the use of simulation goes so far beyond just a simple yes or no quiz, test, assessment, and gets into more like real life. Here we are. So kudos for that. But you guys were already doing training with real cranes for real money with real customers and of real consequence. Was it did you see it as a risk to get into technology, or how did you make that move in this direction so early in the game?
I honestly, with Oculus coming out with a commercially viable headset, was the impetus, I would say, to move forward. I think we looked at simulation. We've believed in simulation for a long time in our space, but it just didn't seem economically viable because the hardware first approach to the business models that existed. So, I think putting anybody, whether I grew up playing a lot of baseball, and we must have practiced 5x more than we played games, right? So simulation is just practicing, and it has to be part of the learning taxonomy, or the. Now that it's economically viable, we're really focusing heavily on software development with our team from Sirius Labs. And I mentioned a lot of those people are out of University of Alberta. They have an excellent, to my knowledge, gaming software development school. So Andrew Charnitsky and others from that team, and I don't mean to say others lightly. It's an incredible team of programmers. From other people I've talked to, some of the people on that team are some of the world's leaders in VR development. So it's a very impressive group. But it's like, okay, it became economically viable, and then we met a very impressive team.
Nice.
That was vetted by, for instance, United Rentals, who does a very good job in running their business for vetting them. So Sirius Labs had worked with United Rentals to build e-learning content as well as a aerial work platform simulator, which proved what was possible. And Sirius Labs in the past had done snubbing simulators for oil and gas and other dabbles, I'd say, in VR, but they're all in at this point. So
I would say these are the best developers I've ever worked with or ever known. The fact that we've come as far as we have in 6 months is absolutely staggering. From waiting one build to the next as the product manager, talking to an SME and learning how the crane should work properly and the different elements, and communicating it mostly verbally or via text and along with the other technical documentation. And then a week later, having exactly what was needed in the simulator with only fine-tuning required. And then that's the end of it. You move forward to the next feature. These guys are truly astronomically good.
That's awesome.
One other comment on that is like the Oculus Rift got down to $600, but it could have taken us 3 years to find a good development group that we wanted to work with and could strike a deal with. But again, partnerships and business is still about people and relationships, and we found a really good team. And again, it's amazing how some of that stuff works out, because again, we could still be on the hunt in a sense for who we wanted to work with.
Yeah, no question about it. So is this something that a trainee can use at home if they have a Rift?
They would still need the hardware. They still need the joysticks. I know the folks on the podcast can't see the joysticks, but there's a fairly robust set of sticks that basically would be found in a crane cab. But that's really all they would need, is the joysticks and the computer and the headset. We have talked about rolling out dialed down versions for Xbox or PS4, which is possible. And what's funny is our first versions of the simulator, the demos were with an Xbox controller, because we didn't have the hardware designed and made yet. But the team put out, I think within 2 weeks when we pulled the trigger, they had a version that I took to a trade show, and guys were running it on an Xbox controller.
Nice.
It was hilarious.
Nice. So let's talk about the hardware a little bit. You mentioned the actuator earlier. What is the actuator, and what's the difference between that and where we're at right now?
Sure. There's a full motion. We're calling it a motion base, and there are companies out there that have built motion bases before, a lot of good ones. I mean, this is I don't know a lot about that technology, but ours currently has, I think, 4 actuators on there with about maybe a 3-inch stroke on each end, so you can sort of create 6 inches of lean, if you will. That's not perfect math there, but you can lower the front end and up the back end, and it what's really impressive when you get on it. I've been on the Aero Work Platform simulator, so you're driving it through a construction site, and it's just rumbling, and if you hit something, the whole thing shakes. But I do think that technology has been around for a while. I know of an impressive company, I think out of Montreal, D-Box. They make a similar unit, and those it's still, frankly, to make, I'd call it an ultra immersive, 100% immersion, you do need a motion element to it. We have that sort of model. We also have a desktop only simulator, which basically achieves everything but the motion. However, in VR, you're still getting massive immersion. I don't know what percentage you would call it, but the only one gentleman today from the Navy mentioned, the only thing he didn't feel was if he's picking up a really heavy load moving forward, a crane would move forward, he would be tilted in the cab a little bit. But I think he understands that we have a model for that, but it's not needed for every application. New trainees can train a ton on the desktop and move over to a motion base if they need to.
And I can't count how many times I've been doing demonstrations with the desktop version with static chairs, and I've had users, as they're slowly turning the crane around to the side, telling me, this is freaking me out. My body is telling me that I am turning, but I know I can't be. I really feel like I'm in the crane.
Yeah. And I would say if your head is supposed to be moving through space, you should have a motion base out there. Like the Aero Work Platform drives around, so you need a motion base to simulate movement of your body. But for most mobile cranes, frankly, there's very little, unless you're doing a pick and carry operation. If you're just set in one place and you're lifting something with a mobile crane, you're typically not moving too much per se. As you swing, you might be moving a little bit in space, and then, like I mentioned, if you're picking up something heavy, you could be leaning forward in a sense. So,
have you had any crane operating veterans use the virtual experience and comment on it?
Yeah. I haven't been there I've heard incredible stories so far from you just think about Alberta is a cold place, and there's some tough guys up there, and so this is the developers are up in Edmonton, Alberta, and two of the largest crane companies I think in the world, Sterling Crane and Mammut. They've had operators through it, and long time operators, and the feedback. There's a lot of pessimism going into it.
Everybody thinks it's a game. Everybody says, "Oh, this is a game. This is gonna be weird. I'm gonna get motion sick. Why are we doing this again?"
Why am I here? And some of the stories I've heard from those sort of gentlemen and ladies hopping off the simulator it's never anything but, oh my gosh, that was so real. I can't believe it. And
I get a real kick out of watching people, especially when we only had the Xbox controller and the joysticks weren't ready yet, watching these grizzled old operators hop in and start trying to reach for all the buttons. And they just pick it up, start operating, and
that's what we're overcoming in the beginning, right? Is most people that are trialing our simulator have never even put a headset on. So there's an adoption, or there's no understanding of what VR actually is yet. So we're battling. It's not a hard battle, but the point is that your students and buyers don't even understand or haven't experienced VR yet, first of all. Then they don't also know, obviously, how to run or what running a simulator in VR is like. Most people get regular simulation because it's on a flat screen. We watch flat screen TVs all the time. So VR being that so new, it's fun to see people get their first immersion. It's really incredible.
Yeah.
And I feel bad for my son. My son Ezra is 5 years old. He will never play an Xbox game on a flat screen TV ever, because
ruined.
Yeah, he's ruined. Yeah. He'll be, if we got him we don't have anything yet, but if we got him something, he would just be like, where's the headset?
It's really true, man. It's crazy how fast it's all going. There's a lot of industry discussion right now about the second generation of all of this high-end stuff, which is like, eye tracking and so forth. It's just going to get better and faster and crazier. But I think when it comes to training and education, it's always going to come back to the curriculum, the content, the use case. Why are we doing it? What do we need to know? Why is this the best way to do that? Do you guys envision a totally virtual training company in the future? Do you think there's always going to be a place for physical machinery in your specific business?
It really depends on the application. If you talk about mobile crane operations, there's a fleet of cranes on the market right now that will last another 30 years or more, that will always have a person in the seat, So that skill set does need to be honed in through eventual seat time. People have to be able to get in the actual cab and run an actual crane. There's no doubt about it. There are cranes. Automation is a massive thing hitting the general industry and construction. I would say a trend globally. There's ports. I'm sure everyone's heard about ports from Norfolk, Virginia to China that are completely automated ports, and with robots and robotic cranes and robotic palletizers and all those things. There are companies right now for mobile cranes working on VR operated mobile cranes. Hiab has a articulating crane that you can literally put on a VR headset and run the crane, basically watching 360 video fed to your VR headset.
Wow.
Liebherr, actually one of the world's largest manufacturers of mobile cranes, is probably the most technologically progressive crane manufacturer that is working on different systems, from safety systems really on their load charts and crane computer to VR simulation and running cranes. I mean, there might be a day that one operator in VR is sitting in a VR room somewhere running 5 different cranes at the same time, because cranes sit idle for a long time. A large customer of ours did a study that on average every hour a crane is idle for about 25 minutes or so. So the operator needs to sit there with the crane and wait for the piece to be welded or the piece to be rigged and move it. So this idea eventually that once that crane model comes on the market that can be run remotely, and there are cranes that can be run remotely already from Liebherr. A technician in Germany can run some of these tower cranes from Germany. So it's incredible. But yeah, I think you've asked your question about being trained. I think virtual reality training will help tremendously. You could maybe achieve 90% of your training plan and then last 10% on a real crane. But there is coming a day where either automation or virtual operation happens.
Wow.
And it sounds too bad on one end where it could displace some workers. But I think a lot of those crane operators will become crane technicians, frankly, because the on-site people need to be able to troubleshoot the crane's electronics and set up cranes and move them around. I mean, that sort of stuff will never, well, I can't never say never, but hard to automate that sort of stuff.
How far out do you think we are before that's the norm?
Well, first of all, not every crane manufacturer's the same. I mean, the technology might come with one manufacturer and it's heavily disruptive to the industry and not available with the others. So, for virtual operation, I'm not certain if it's in the next 5 or 10 years. I think by the time you're automating cars down the road, you could be automating or virtually running cranes as well. A big issue with construction and industrial work is just eyeballs on the lifts and the location. I mean, when you're at a refinery and you got 20 cranes working on an area of the refinery, I mean, the people on the ground need to know what's being lifted well. I mean, that's part of it. Riggers and the people handling loads on the ground. That is why I love recruiting in our industry, is that sort of role. I don't see it ever being automated. I mean, which is great. It's a great opportunity for young people to get in our space, whether they become a welder or boilermaker, pipe fitter, that have rigging skills, because and most crafts in general can't be automated too easily. So I think I'm 30. I mean, I think I encourage people my age to look for jobs and careers that can't be automated. And this is a bigger trend, bigger discussion. The Economist put out an article, I think it was by Business Insider or somebody else, but it showed the number of the probability of a job being automated. And on the very top of the list was like a telemarketer at a 99% probability over the next 20 years. And then 1% chance of automation or something was a chemical engineer.
Oh, wow.
Over the next 20 years. So it's something to be to consider as people develop learners and develop young people. I mean, I wouldn't go to telemarketing classes anytime soon,
I could just hear the hearts breaking.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Dang it.
That's really amazing. Is there anything that VR is not capable of right now that you wish it would?
I'd say the eye tracking, but we know that that's coming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know one of the holy grails per se is cordless, just so you can be detached from the computer a bit, so you can walk around a room easier. When I shoot my bow and arrow with one of the games, and I trip on the cord, it kind of stinks. It messes up my shot. But yeah, what else?
Honestly, there's not all that much.
They're working on everything, including hands. I mean, I'm excited to see when there's no hand controls, there's just gestures with your actual hands. Mm-hmm. That'll be key. But the Oculus Touch and the HTC Vive controls, those are really neat. I love them as well. But I think a lot of folks are excited about just using natural hand gestures to do stuff.
I think the biggest things I've heard would be being able to see your natural hands, gesture-based, cordless, as well as the 4K displays. Because that's probably the single biggest issue that we have is you put a brand new user, give them the headset, and you take 45 seconds adjusting it, dialing in so that they're mostly able to see. The legibility is definitely there. You can read it. Is it as sharp as it could be? Definitely not. As soon as we can get 4K going, I've heard people expecting that you'll be able to have even sharper clarity in VR than you will in reality.
Pretty amazing to think about. So podcasts being what they are, at the time that this is first published, you guys will not have been commercially available, but who knows, a year down the road, somebody might be checking this out for the first time. So where can somebody go to find out more about what you guys are up to, whenever today is?
Sure. No, iti.com. Thank you for that plug. I think we're iti.com/VR is our simulation microsite. And we're launching in 2 weeks at ConExpo. If you have never been to ConExpo or a big construction show like that, it's a great place to see a lot of industrial and construction equipment, and learning and education is always a big part of it. So VR is going to be a major trend at ConExpo. There's another event in Germany called Bauma, similar to ConExpo, but I think education and funding, like you mentioned for VR, is education funding is pouring into general industry and construction, especially in technologies like VR, augmented reality, machine learning, automation, like we've talked about. So it's fun to see those technologies sort of on display and what other companies are doing with it. It's great.
Are you guys pursuing other VR conferences and events, or are you kind of industry specific with construction?
We might join there. I know there's some local user group type groups in Houston. The folks from Road to VR were a part of the Houston VR group, and that might be interesting to see. I think Road to VR is a great media group because they do publish almost. If anybody's doing anything neat in VR, we can go read about it, which is helpful. And then if we want to go see it, we can. But additionally, we have Cirrus Labs. They live and dream this stuff all the time. They speak in VR. I mean, they must have dream in VR. So with a partner like that, we don't have to do all the research by any means. They're actually doing it, and they're the experts. But so it's we get the joy of bringing VR to our industry, I guess, in those trade shows that are in our industry.
I love it. Well, you've inspired me to do some research into Sirius and reach out to Andrew over there and hear a little more about their perspective working with a client like you guys. This is so consequential to your business, and yet you're not a programming house or a design shop. You're in training. You're at the front lines of this stuff. So it's a really neat partnership, and I think important for those of us who are enthusiasts of the technology itself, and perhaps training or education generally, to understand that it does take a lot of different kinds of talents all coming together in order to bring these experiences to the world. So you guys are way ahead of the game as far as what anything I've seen in the industrial capacity, and it's really exciting to be able to meet you and talk about where you're at and imagine where it's going.
Cool. Thanks, Pete. We're really happy to be here, and thank you for having us.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
New School VR is graciously supported by and recorded live at Concordia University in beautiful Portland, Oregon. For over 100 years, Concordia has been preparing teachers and learning professionals for life and for a living. For more information, visit cu-portland.edu. And by ... an experiential design and technology studio specializing in custom virtual reality and experiential marketing activations that incite wonder and inspire action. See more at ... .io. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on iTunes or through your favorite podcast delivery app. Visit us online at newschoolvr.com, and thanks for listening. I'm your host, Pinky Gonzalez, and this is New School VR.
This VR podcast is dope.